is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
The views and opinions of the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. This is C.A. Newry and I shall be your host for today as we have continued a discussion that we did last week about researching people's ancestry, researching people's family trees and constructing family trees, right? Today we're going to go and basically educate the listening audience who are interested in their lineage on how to research, what to be looking for, what to include. But before we do all of that, I'm going to do some housekeeping, right? We have historical researcher. I'm trying to get a correct name for you, right? Because, you know, I do social politics, right? And I tend to instigate and insult people all again and insult me back. I find that when you call people without a degree a historian, the people with degrees get vexed. Yeah. Right? I remember, I could do a testimony. I call you a historian once and I got an inbox. So what degree this and what are they studying history and this? I said, okay, I can find a new name for you. But besides you doing historical research, right? Besides you writing books, because you're a part of that system. Right. People say, no. This title for us. We get PhD. Here for y'all who ain't get no PhD. Right? So I'm trying to craft a narrative, trying to craft a title for you. Historical research is good.
Yeah, man, that's fine, man.
Yeah, you don't upset the guy. You can't call you historian no more. Eh?
Man, you can still call me a historian. That's
you want them people inbox me again? No, man. The academics tell me don't call you that. You don't get no PhD yet, right? I said, you get book yet? No, but I don't worry about that, right? But I get Bahamian historical researcher, right? Who does a lot of research on the Afro concept of the Bahamas, right? And our past, right? He's the author of the book. What the book name?
Black Rinse, a new history of the African diaspora in the Bahamas.
Yes.
But simply Black Rinse.
Yes, and mind you, Christopher Davis and I have rowed about this book before the book was published, because, you know, I have different viewpoints of Columbus and the statue. We used to debate a lot about Columbus statue, right? Yeah. To point where when he mentioned Columbus statue, I come in. I come and leave the statue alone, right? But I want to know what big things are you doing now? So we could start off the conversation with that, and then we go back into how can Bahamians who are interested in their family trees, their lineage, and who wants to research and don't know what to do, what type of information they need to collect, photocopy, go where to go research it. That's what the conversation is going to be about. But I want to hear what you're doing now, and then we could go into that conversation.
Yeah, so, you know, this year has been pretty crazy for me. Of course, I've been doing a lot of work in Ghana, a lot of work with the Sister City program in an attempt to link us with the African diaspora, as well as cities throughout North America, right? I've actually had 4 articles published recently, 2 in the most recent journal of the International Journal of Carnival Arts, and I presented on that in Ghana December gone, quite a while back now. And then I also just recently, about 2 months ago, came back from the All America Sister Cities Summit, where I was the youngest presenter there, speaking on, of course, the origins of John Canoe and the spread throughout the diaspora. And then I have 2 other articles that were published in the Bahamas Historical Society Journal, the most recent one. And that one speaks to the resurrection of John Canoe, the Hunter General, and of course, Kwamino, who was the first, and some people would argue only, true revolutionary of the Bahamas. And his name was Kwamino.
We got to give a narrative of him so Bahamians people can appreciate who this Kwamino person is.
But certainly, briefly, I'd encourage people to get the journal. It's available at Bahamas Historical Society, or you could hit us up at Clifton Heritage Park, and we'll get some to you. But essentially, Kwamino, well, let me start off like this. You know that throughout the Caribbean, those of us who familiar with Jamaica, Antigua, you have all of these national heroes who are from present-day Ghana. The Akan people, of which the Ahanta people, where John Canoe comes from, is a part of, right? So you have Queen Nani in Jamaica being the most famous one. The national and foremost national hero of Guyana is a man named Kofi, also from the same area. And then you have Kwaku from Antigua, and of course that's the same Kwaku, like we have Kwaku Street right there off of each street. Means born on a Wednesday, all from the same culture. All of these areas also are these fleeting practices of John Canoe, and this would kind of caused me to delve into this type of research. And I was like, well, how come these people just do a little bit of John Canoe? And they have these big-time revolutionary heroes. And we just do big-time John Canoe. And we don't have any Akan representative. And literally almost every Caribbean, about half of the English-speaking Caribbean countries, when you look at their foremost or among their foremost national heroes, all of them, names like Kwame and Kwaku and all of these
Well,
things.
we finally got Paul Black Kate. Black
yeah.
Kate now is a national hero, a part of the 6 national heroes that we have. Mind you, most people don't know who the other 5 is, but definitely I remember Black Kate. Kate Moss is definitely considered a national hero, has been dubbed national hero of the Bahamas. And you trying to say that there should be more?
Oh, yeah, certainly. This guy, Kwamino, for me, certainly belongs on the list. Kate Moss, I call her Saint Kate, actually. She was near the top of that list for the whole time for me. And as a matter of fact, I think that she was also the kind of the lowest hanging fruit, because a lot more Bahamians were becoming familiar with the story, particularly through Dr. Ian Strawn's brilliant publication as well. That put a huge boost behind it. And I think it's great to see that she was made a national hero, right? But Kwamino also belongs there, because as I said, he is our sort of representative of a national or would-be national hero on this sort of Akan pantheon of heroes in the Caribbean. His name is Kwamino. In 1730, well, he was actually, it seems to be one of the warriors of John Canoe himself as well. We know that the first 2 ships, one of which he would have arrived on, that came from southwest Ghana, were from the Hanta people, the warrior, and many of whom were the warriors of John Canoe. This guy was a military guy from that region, so it's plausible to say he may have been an actual warrior of John Canoe himself. However, this guy was actually incredible, so they attempted to enslave him. And he lived as what they call the bush Negro for a time, which is essentially what the French would call a petite maroon. These were maroons who didn't form those grand communities like in Colombia, Brazil, and Jamaica.
Petit maroon.
Right, but had smaller communities. And these represent sort of the pinnacle of resistance to slavery, forming communities. You got pretty much, to put it in layman's terms, we'd rather go live in the bush, we'd rather go live in the mangroves and the swamp than to be subjected to slavery. And this is how Kwamino lived for a while. And during that time, he slowly whispered in the ears of other Africans about an impending revolt. And what's so amazing about him and the other Akan revolutionaries throughout the Caribbean, many of whom were women, I should add, these people were not just satisfied with the freedom of themselves and their kin and their family. These people made bold attempts to not only free everybody on the island, but to topple the British colonial power at the time. And that is certainly what Kwamino did in 1734. And his September 10th was when he was planning on doing it, but the plan was foiled.
But this is in Bahamas he did this?
Right there in the Bahamas,
You
right in
tell the
Providence.
story so we can understand it properly.
Oh, yeah. So
What did this boy do?
So he planned, and he got other people involved with the plan to essentially conquer the island of New Providence, and as they were putting it back then, to make the Bahamas an African colony. So just months before this, in what is now the U.S. Virgin Islands, the island of St. Mary, if I'm not mistaken, another, we could call her a great queen. They actually call her Queen Brefu. She was successful in conquering that island that she was enslaved on for an entire year. Nani did the same in what is now Northeast Jamaica. Nani Town is still there. And so he was attempting to do something similar. And ironically, his attempt was due to start less than a month after Queen Brefu the British finally took the island back from Queen Brefu.
And what year is this?
1734.
This is around when Woodes Rogers came.
Well, this was a little afterwards, Rogers. This is where you can make the connection right now. And this is a place, you got to chuckle because this is a place me and you have debated about for years and years and years, right? But we might finally come to some agreement on this one.
Go ahead.
So he killed the governor first.
Lord have mercy.
To kill the governor first. right? So he was when he was spotted. When he was arrested, he actually killed one of the people who was arresting him. We believe it was a white officer, actually, with a dagger. Not murdered the man because he was the one being apprehended, right? But he killed the guy who was trying to arrest him, and then he was eventually subdued by a large crowd of people. And then they interrogated them, whipped them and did all of these horrible things to get them to confess to whatever they wanted, essentially. But it was discovered and admitted and accepted that Kwamino, in fact, did plan to take over the entire island. And the key would be when he would fire the cannon after he himself killed the governor. And this is what resulted in that same space that we have right now where Government House is today. So that's not the original structure from then, but that spot was chosen because this African man actually planned to kill the governor. And what's the name of the hill that Government House lays on now?
Mount Fitzwilliam.
And that's who the governor was, Richard Fitzwilliam.
So you're saying in 1732?
34.
There was a revolt.
Well, attempted revolt. It was a planned revolt. It was supposed to start. The newspaper article said like on Tuesday next, and I worked it out to be September 10th of 1734.
And how many Africans were involved?
Several. Now, there were a very small number of Africans at the time. I would say probably less than 500 on the island at the time. So though on one end, that sort of lessens the scale of what this revolution would have been, on the other side of it, it meant that it was very much possible. You understand? Because it's a small group of people. You probably just take over Nassau and it's done. And Nassau is not what it is today back then,
The pirates were already expelled at this present time.
Right, yeah. Well, let's not say expelled, but the golden age of piracy was over by then. This was about a decade after that, even though it was still going on fleetingly. But the Bahamas was still this very... kind of seen as this very fleeting backwash colony. And as a matter of fact, at the time, there were more whites on the island than blacks. You see? Yeah.
That's before the Spanish come and ran all the white people off and leave all the black people here.
No, well, this was after that, actually. This is quite a bit after that. That happened in 1693, 1694.
So a few Bahamians know that all of the white people left this country at one point in time. And let's leave the slaves because the Spanish was attacking all of them.
Right. And they was taking people. So that's why actually... when it comes to our African heritage, you actually see it's very much tied to when Woodes Rogers arrived here, despite the fact that they try to, as I hear you all say on the show all the time, they try to present this arrival of Woodes Rogers as this wonderful thing, talking about expelling piracy.
You trying to say Woodes Rogers is not a national hero?
Oh, no, man. That man was a prolific slave trader.
You Bahamians know he's a slave trader?
It's in our DNA. He slave traded extensively, especially with the East India Company. So not only was he doing this to the West, he was slave trading people, Africans, to Eastern Asia. And this was done mostly from Madagascar. And it's my theory, I don't know if you were involved in that discussion, but it was right there on Guardian where they were talking about the DNA tests and stuff, and they were talking about the Madagascar roots, and I actually called in and I say, my theory is that's connected to the slave trading activities of Woodes Rogers. And he was a prolific slave trader. And as a matter of fact, the second ship that came to the Bahamas, in part from the Haunted region, was owned by Woodes Rogers and his son, William Whetstone Rogers.
And before we transition, what does piracy expelled and commerce restored mean?
Well, in the context of the British kind of John Bull-esque attitude, essentially it meant... So let's first contextualize these pirates, right? From the British perspective, they all tried to paint them with run brushes, these criminals, these outlaws, right? But in reality, pirates had far more decorum. They operated more like a republic. And though many pirates like Henry Every were, and Woodes Rogers, if you could argue, were ruthless slave traders just like everyone else, you had people like Blackbeard, you had people like Black Semony and Bartholomew Roberts, who were certainly not as racist as many of their European counterparts.
Who he was?
The quartermaster of Blackbeard. There are some authors that actually say that Blackbeard himself was of partial African descent, though I don't 100% agree with that. But what we do know now is that many of his crew, some people say most of his crew, were were African descendants, right? And many of them, like Caesar, were people who were enslaved in Africa, brought to the West, ran away from their plantation and joined a pirate crew, or they might have been a part of a village or a town that was sacked by a pirate crew, and then they were absorbed into this. So it was a lot more nuance within the world of piracy, right? Whereas the colonial government's policy was slavery. You African, you at risk of being enslaved, and we plan to enslave most Africans and use and exploit their labor. Black Caesar was someone who became a powerful pirate in his own right, even after leaving the crew of Blackbeard, as it seems. And that's why there's a key in the Florida Keys that's actually named after him. But he was one of the proteges of the infamous Blackbeard the pirate.
And we need to own that Black Caesar narrative because he was living in the Bahamas at the same time. I think he got escaped from one of these plantations here. But when Woodes Rogers came, and we soon changed the narrative in terms of transition.
Certainly.
When he said that he was giving pardons to pirates.
Yeah.
Was he including people like Black Caesar?
No, he certainly was not.
So who he meant when he said be pardoning pirates?
Well, to be frank, he was meaning people like the Simonettes. He was meaning people like the Carriers, and we meaning the white ones who were around at that time.
So the black pirates, what he's going to do with them?
Well, they was essentially at risk of being enslaved. There's a story of John Julian. So John Julian was a mosquito, as they call them, from Honduras. He had a black African mother, and he had an indigenous from Honduras father. You understand? They used to call him the teenage pirate. So he was in the crew of Black Sam Bellamy, and they actually sacked a slave ship called the Widow Galley. And converted that slave ship. So this shows you how piracy and slavery was sometimes at odds, right? And then converted that into a pirate ship. And you know where they bring that pirate ship and they did all that? Right here in the Bahamas.
Man, we have all kind of legacy and stories to tell.
So when Woodes Rogers arrived and all this stuff was happening, John Julian, the teenage pirate, was not included in that deal. So what he did is he ran away to the United States, and he still ended up being enslaved in the United States. And then he was actually executed, I believe, in 1733 in Boston under the name Indian John. But his name was, in fact, John Julian. He was what they call a mosquito today from Central America, we believe, present-day Honduras, right? So again, you know, there's been this long sort of question, even in the curriculum, which I'm happy to say has now gone through a drastic change, right? But there's always sort of been this question with how, imagine you're settled in the Bahamas, and how does Woodes Rogers' presence benefit you? When in reality, for anybody of African descent, i.e. Black Bahamians, Afro-Bahamians, whatever you want to call it, the question should be, you rather be a pirate or a slave?
Woodes Rogers is going to enslave all us.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to enslave.
And that's exactly what he did.
Okay, so let's make a transition here, right? This text says that I have traced my family on my mom's side to the 1600s. Took years, but it got done. And the slave part of it, that's good that they got actually traced the slavery narrative also. But I see a caller here, so Kermit, patch that caller through because I want to start our conversation on why is it important? Why do we promote Bahamians for researching their ancestry? And then I want to go in terms of tools and what they should be recording and how it would benefit us in general. Even that the DNA testing, they mention ancestry and they plan to use that documentation to trace. They're trying to trace that Ghana ship, the first Ghana ship.
The Bahama Galley. So that was a part of my research that I did. The Bahama Galley, which came from Cape 3 Points, which is a stone throws away from Princestown, which is the fort that our hero John Canoe was operating from when he fought against and stifled the transatlantic slave trade.
So let's go to this call and then we can start that conversation. Go ahead, Cody. Can you hear us?
Hey, good morning, Mr. Newry. Good morning, John Qua and Chris.
Yes, hey, brother.
Yeah, Chris, enough respect. Don't worry about the risk. You know what I mean? You are, all right, you as a public intellectual, right, brother?
Respect, brother.
Don't be intimidated by, I mean, CA Newry is my boy. I like CA. But what I'm saying is, I appreciate what you're doing, and so it's no different from me during the pandemic being correct about many things, and as far as history. With the information overload, we don't need someone with a PhD. All we need is someone with sincerity and truth and right and who stands for humanity. You see what I'm saying, brother?
Right.
One question I have that. When you say the East India Company, you mean the Dutch East India Company, right?
No, they are the British East India Company.
I remember. Yeah. So when you said East India, I was thinking about the Dutch. but the Dutch was in the slave trade before the British, and so the Portuguese and the Dutch would be in the first. Remember the first trip by Gillianis,
right.
Because he saw in one of the islands, the Canary Islands, I think, off the coast, coast of West Africa, he enslaved them, and he captured them and carried them back to Portugal to impress Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I'd like for you to comment on what I'm about to say. Remember now, the Arab slave trade is much older than the African slave trade, and the Arab, I can't remember all the details, Chris.
Yeah.
The Arabs went to extreme measures to suppress the African people from having progeny in enslavement and to avoid miscegenation.
Certainly.
But by the time that the Dutch East India Company established slavery, miscegenated blacks or light-skinned black imported by the British. And so I'm looking at this miscegenation is taking place much earlier through the Arab slave trade, et cetera,
right.
and the monopoly eventually by the British. So I would just like for you to comment on that because I don't know if you're getting into the family name thing, but I was trying to call in the other time. But if you do, then I'll call in because I have like a triangulated family name that I think, you know what I mean? I'd like to find out, but out of Africa it all began.
Right.
According to the DNA Symposium, but I like to say an intellectual shouldn't fear the truth, Chris.
Oh yeah,
My brother?
Well, I love the comment on that. I think that's a brilliant comment, and I actually agree wholeheartedly with you. And to bring some context to that era you speaking about, right? So, we're talking about when you look at the history of Africa, it has a very, very conflicted relationship historically with two of the major world religions. That's Islam and Christianity. That's the truth, right? So both the Quran and the Bible were introduced to people, all people of African descent, in the most nefarious ways. That's a whole nother show. We ain't to get into that, but that's facts, right? Accept it or don't accept it, that's facts. Now, the Arab slave trade, as he said, is far older, and it is, of course, married with the spread of Islam, right? And as a matter of fact, that's why you see now in Arab Springs, when Arab Springs happened, that spread it all the way to Mauritania, which is northwest Africa, right? And they don't talk much about Berber Springs, which is one that was actually more attached to the indigenous Africans of North America, right? However, that being said, the Arab slave trade, as brutal as it was nothing as brutal as the unprecedented transatlantic slave trade that was perpetrated by Europeans that also included the enslavement of Arab Africans and Islamic Africans as well, many of whom came to the Bahamas.
Because Africans could embrace Islam, and part of Islam, you can't enslave Islamic people.
And there's an overriding point to this, and I'm sure once I make this point 52, I'm sure he might even call back on this one. He'd agree wholeheartedly. So, of course, both of these monotheistic religions have had a horrible impact on Africa. We're talking about multiple genocides, not just one. It's actually multiple genocides that are all convoluted into one because now we see each other as quote-unquote black people, one African people, or we claim to, I should say, right? But when you look at African kingdoms, right, I could probably name, I would say there's one, you could argue two. But let me just ask a question. How many great African Christian kingdoms have there been in history? So you could argue one, ask them. So we're talking about the age of the Candaces, Amon-Arenas, and the Candaces, the most famous one being the Queen of Sheba. This is the period that we're talking about. This is why Ethiopia has the oldest churches in the world to this day, right? So we could put the Kingdom of Aksum. The other one that people argue that I refute is the Kingdom of Congo. So a lot of people don't even know that there are kingdoms in West Africa, namely the Kingdom of Congo, that was under, they call him King Alfonso I, but he was actually King Mvemba when he got baptized. But he only got baptized to protect his people from slavery because the Catholic Church had passed a papal bull called Dum Diversas, Latin for until different, that gave all good Catholic nations and Catholic people to right to reduce to from the document. Me and just a slave forever, and your grandchildren can be my slave forever. And this was what it was imposed initially on all infidel peoples, i.e. non-Catholics, and then it was later curtailed to apply only to Africans. And this is what stripped Africans completely of their humanity. That is why King Alfonso got baptized, to try to use their own rules and laws against them. And despite them doing that and becoming a Christian nation, that region remains the place where more Africans were taken in the transatlantic slave trade than any other place in the world. Now, put that on the side. Other question, how many great Islamic kingdoms were there in Africa? And there were many. There were many. and even in the Islamic pantheon.
Master Musa and thing was Islamic.
Right, so I made some friends with some Algerian fellas when I was long time ago when I was playing beach soccer in Switzerland. Different period of my life. And I made some friends with some Algerian fellas, and they nicknamed me Bilal. And they used to call me Bilal.
What does that mean?
Well, Bilal is actually the first man to call to song the people of Islam. He is second to Jesus, to Muhammad. You understand? Right. And he is the black man from Ethiopia who is acknowledged as black in the Islamic world. And we have people like, let's just throw one out there. St. Augustine. This is a man who is African, right? And he is not portrayed or even acknowledged as African, even at this private school that's named in his honor right here in the Bahamas. Yeah, I think what 52 was trying to allude to is certainly true. We must not disregard the Islamic view of it, but at the end of the day, what the Europeans have done, that has even, of course, negatively affected the Islamic or Arab world, however you want to, or the so-called Middle East, however you want to refer to it, is certainly something to be acknowledged. And when we talk about things like reparations and all of these things, and the Arab slave trade is what softened Africa up. For the European slave trade, to paraphrase the words of the great historian John Henry Clark.
I want to even talk about that, but I ain't gonna go there because I can take us on a tangent, right? Because I was going to say the Moors who turned Muslim sold us into the Portuguese because they were already in. But anyway, that's a different thing,
right? Yeah,
but I think that's a different thing because everyone bragging about the Moors,
but that's tied. That's tied with that.
They didn't see themselves as Africans,
but that's tied with that spread of Islam. When you saw, and of course, these people were also mixed with the oppressor.
Yes.
You understand? So that's a whole nother show.
They didn't view themselves as Africans. They enslave us too.
So when you look at the European mulatto Christian, and when you look at the Arabized or half Arab, whatever you want to call it, African, you see they doing the same thing because, of course, Islam also had it mandated into law that it was okay to produce their perpetual servitude infidel people. However, their version of slavery was quite different than the chattel slavery that Europeans imposed on Africans.
You can get married too.
Thank you. And the richest man in the world, Mansa Musa, his grandfather was said to have been a part of that servant class in there. Bahamas was becoming the governor.
No.
Right. And we celebrate a black person becoming president now. So imagine back then, Right.
So let's transition now and go back to our initial topic what we're talking about. We're talking about family trees.
Right.
Right? Where can Bahamians who listen in the audience now go to find the generic, most basic, rudimentary family tree to say, I'm looking for my daddy, Mike Smith?
So there is the Hope Town Museum that is commonly known as, who spearheaded or oversaw the Bahamas Genealogy Project. So if you type in the Bahamas Genealogy Project, you would be surprised. They have the most, to date I know, as far as I know, the most kind of extensive genealogical database, right? And of course, there are many, many Bahamian family names that are there. So they have a special list that's there, one based on the Y chromosome, one based on the X chromosome. And they have, I think it might even be thousands of basic family trees that you could literally go on to.
I see that, all the similarities and the Carries there.
Right. Well, I know Carrie for sure. They actually tell you like their origin, So the Carries, or the white Carries, I should say that were here, because there was one point where family members owned enslaved people too. That's, before I even begin, that's a massive confusion. So even the person that sent that message earlier, I don't know if you noticed, I kind of jump up and smirk a little bit because a lot of Bahamians, like, we look at our surnames and we don't realize or acknowledge or don't want to acknowledge that these are in fact enslaved names. So even if it's from this free black so and so and so, it is, if they are of African descent, it is most likely that they were actually one of those people that came here, unless you could, of course, directly attach yourself to one of the lineages from the so-called liberated Africans, who I call displaced Africans. But even then, when you understand how family trees work, we have two parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. So when we're talking about those days of slavery, when most of us first arrive here, to be realistic, when we look at that period, we're talking about like 256 people in some cases, if you're going back 6, 7, 8 generations. right? So yes, we may be lucky enough to trace one stream, and we typically do it through our fathers and mothers' surnames, and then go paternalistically from there, because it's kind of easy to do because the names pass that way. But when you think about how many people went into making you, and then people make all of these bold claims. So what I say is, if you are a person of African descent in the Bahamas, you could almost 99.5% be sure that one of your ancestors were enslaved at some point. And at one point in the Bahamian population, it was 80% enslaved almost. So it's actually 78, 79%, right? And this was before the register was taken. So this isn't even those undocumented ones, right? And those that are coming through on this boat and leaving, and so it's a lot of stuff like that.
Let me do a politically charged question. Just yes or no, right? Just this is not even part of the conversation.
All right.
It's been said that every black Negro, African descent person has Anglo-white DNA because of the mixture of slavery, whatever it is. Can I say that every white Bahamian have African black DNA? Everyone inside here? All mulattoes?
Well, not everyone, because remember, it's a lot.
Why can I have to be mixed up? They can't be mixed up.
Well, let me say this. Let me start the other way then, before I make that first point I was going to make. Certainly, the majority of them. So that's even where the term Conky Joe comes from. So the term Conky Joe, though some view it as a racial epithet, I don't say that it necessarily is, because that is a terminology that came with the Loyalists to refer to the white people that they met here. So we're talking about names like Johnson and Carey and Simonet and Sawyer and Russell, like Fritz, and you know exactly the names they're talking about, right? And so those were the people who were labeled as Conky Joes. And that wasn't meant to be an insult on so many levels. Of course, the conch with the white skin is usually the definition, but it was much deeper than that. It was also to tease many of them that they, in fact, Brown, have a little, your granddaddy was mulatto, and all these little jive to say that they have some black blood in them.
Watch me bait you again.
Right.
What about Long Island? Any white people in Long Island?
Sort of.
He's sort of white.
Right. See,
really.
when we use terms...
What about Harbor Island? Any white people in Harbor Island?
Of course, when we use terms black and white, it's a social construct, right?
I talk about the American definition.
So let me put it this way. What is white in Long Island is not white in the United States.
I talk about the American definition.
Right. No. Oh, no.
Okay, that's what I was saying. They just mix up. They have 1%.
Let me put it in perspective. So Bahamians, a lot of us, I actually heard somebody even say that the Bahamas is more than 15% white.
More than 15%?
More than 15%.
That's a lot of white people.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's 3 out of every 20 people. No, that's a little high. But when you look at these, and not that I try to praise these places, right? But in this context, they are good sources because they want to know the demographics of every country. So you go on the CIA website, look at the demographics of the Bahamas.
They say 90% black.
Less than 5% white.
Is it less than 5%?
Less than 5%.
The Americans look at us all do.
And then they get 7%, 7 point something and 4 point 7 point something percent. They just have defined as mixed race.
Mixed race.
And they're using their racial gradation standards, the one drop rule, which is white. And so when they go to Europe, when they go to, certain parts of Western Europe, I should say, and high north too, when they go to the United States or Canada, they won't be considered white at all.
Back in the day, they could get a document from the JP and declare that themselves white. We could apply, white Bahamians applied to be white, and they present that in the United States and Florida for where they work on the farms. But going back to, you mentioned Abaco, Hopetown.
Yeah.
There's a website, a document called Winnie Malone.
Yeah, Winnie Malone. That's the same one I'm referring to, actually. Yeah.
And then Bahamians could use that as a basis of researching their family names.
Right.
As a Winnie Malone, what is Bahamas project thing called then?
The Bahamas DNA Project. It was a part of the Winnie Malone, more commonly known as the Hopetown Museum's initiative.
Okay, so when we come back from the short break, we're going to start delving into that in terms of how and where do you go to research your surname, where do you go and search DNA, because they already have these things structured for the Bahamas, right? You can apply, put your DNA listing on that, and you can see how you relate to all these different surnames and stuff like that.
Certainly.
Okay, this has been Guardian Radio AM. This is C.A. Newry. Of course, we have historical researcher. See, I get a name. Christopher Davis here. We're discussing how you can research your surname and conduct your family trees. We'll be right back.
Bahamas. Salisbury wants you to join us as we celebrate our amazing Bahamian athletes as they head to Paris for the 2024 Olympic Games. As a truly Bahamian company, we're cheering loud and proud for our incredible team. Join us this summer as we raise a toast to their hard work and dedication as they proudly represent our flag, our country, our peer, our athletes. Here's to bringing home the gold. Good luck, Team Bahamas. Salisbury, truly Bahamian. Drink responsibly.
The Grand Bahama News is available every Tuesday in the Nassau Guardian. You can buy your local paper at Freeport convenience stores, Western Bakery, De Gregory's Fine Foods, and Bellevue Gifts. Now is the time to reach your Grand Bahama market with affordable packages, including print and digital. Call GB News sales representative Kavandre at 822-6717 or message him on WhatsApp for ad rates. Classified ads are now available every Tuesday as well. Keep up with everything Grand Bahamian every Tuesday in the Nassau Guardian.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
Planning a trip to the beautiful Bahamas? Look no further than Hertz Car Rental. With convenient locations in Nassau and Freeport, Grand Bahama, we are here to get you there. Whether you're exploring the vibrant streets and sights of Nassau or soaking up the sun in Freeport, Hertz has the perfect ride for your adventure. Book at our Freeport location at 352-3297 or Nassau location at 377-8684 or visit our website at hertzbahamas.com. All major credit cards accepted. Hertz Car Rental. Your journey starts with us.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio AM. Of course, this is CA Newry, and of course, we have historical researcher Christopher Davis here with us, and we talk about family trees and what to research in family trees. I use 3 sites, but I use predominantly something called FamilySearch.org.
Yeah.
FamilySearch.org. Is that a good site to go?
Yeah, certainly is. It's actually, well, I don't want to cast no aspersion on any denomination or whatever, but they were made by, it's actually a Mormon.
Yeah, a lot of same people.
Yeah, they the ones who do that. You know, it's the reason they have for collecting so much people's data in most of the countries they go to.
They all around here riding bicycles and short t-shirt.
They collect all of this stuff, right? But FamilySearch.org could be one. And I don't want to discourage people from visiting the Department of Archives, right? Because they have everything sort of laid out in front of you, and everything is not properly indexed in FamilySearch.org.
The moment have to go there and they index it for me.
Right, yeah, but exactly. But if you sign up for the pro one, and then you have a lot more access, and then there are people you could reach out to as well, I guess, to search certain documents. But you could go right there. You click on the search bar, and then you just click records. That's the best place to search. And then when you just click records, then you start to experiment typing the names. You can see all of the different search options on the right-hand side. So if you're looking for your grandmother and you don't know when she was born, but you know her name and you know the grandfather name, they have you could put the name of your grandfather on next to the spouse. You know, it's many different options that you could fill in. And then you scroll straight to the bottom and make sure you put it on Bahamas. But sometimes, and even when you find people who move around, so I do a lot of research for people from the United States who have roots in the Bahamas, and I always use FamilySearch.org, but it's something that you have to learn how to navigate, and it can take time.
I found slave records on FamilySearch.org. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, that's certainly accurate as well. As a matter of fact, again, as I was saying before the break, you know, that's where that's the reality of many of our ancestors in the Bahamas. Of course, it's not the totality of our history. You know, we was mentioning, talking a little bit about Africa and all that earlier, but it certainly represents where most of us descend from, and that's why it's so important. But the best record that you could find on FamilySearch.org are actually those marriage records, right? Especially when you're trying to build a family tree, when you're trying to take your roots all the way back as far as you could go, because when you look at the marriage license or the marriage record, they have the names of the fathers, they have the age, they have the job, they have the street they was on, they have the name of the church, they have the name of the pastor, they have the name of the witnesses. You know, so it's so much information that could actually be garnered. And then with the age, you could kind of then gauge and go back, and then you could match the records that pop up with their birth, and then you could continue to go back, you know. But it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of effort. Of course, this is a service that I myself provide.
Give me some names of people who do this.
Names of people who do
research, family
do
tree.
research on well, most families actually have like their own sort of personal family historian, right? So it's not, but I do know of myself. I do know that there are some great young researchers at Antiquities Monument and Museum as well. And of course, myself at Clifton Heritage Park. I get dropping his name, but Mr. Kenneth Butler, for me, he is one of the most astute family researchers. He did a lot of research on Raleigh Gray, the great boatman from Exuma. I think he is the guy that did all of that research and dug up all of that great Bahamian history. I don't know how to reach him, and I wouldn't want to put his contact out on the air without permission. But yeah, that man Kenneth Butler, I would say he is one of the foremost family knowledgeable people about families and their origins in the Bahamas.
And before I go to this caller, what is the first thing? Say I don't know me, but I want to start a family tree. What do I do first? Recommend something.
Oh, well, first of all, talk to the people in your family. Talk to your old auntie, you know, old Auntie Sue and people like that. And ask them the names. You know, the names was important.
Get your name of your mommy, your daddy, sister,
right.
your uncles, and whatever it is.
Right, you know, as much as you can. Maiden names for the mothers. Sometimes that throws people off. So remember, Grammy got married to Grandpa, and so she had a maiden name. So
make sure you get a maiden name for the females.
Right, and sometimes you got to search from that. But it's really about talking to people and building your family tree as best as you can, just by talking to your family that's still around. So
before you start anything, do oral research amongst your family members.
Certainly.
And record that information first before you go on all these other sites and things.
Certainly, and oral history for me is very important now. And whenever I do Junkanu, it was actually a marriage of the oral histories that came from the Bahamas and from Africa, whether it's all over Ghana or just the village that he was from, and then marrying it with the empirical data, newspaper articles, and all of that that's found. So oral history is also very important. And oral history, though it may be skewed over time, it's always based in some slither of truth, no matter how far off from the actual truth that it may stray.
Okay, let's go to this caller quickly and then come back to you. Go ahead, Cody, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Newry, and good morning to Mr. Davis.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Davis, I like the message you bring, and I listen to you as often as I could.
Thank you.
You mentioned the religion and its impact on Africa and Africans.
Right.
So I was just curious, which religion do you subscribe to?
Or do I subscribe to?
we had you on air one time talking about your religion, right?
Sort of. Yeah, sort of. Well, me, I'm not an atheist, you know, so that's a lot of people that hear me speaking about world religions and all of that. And I know Bahamians, you know, we could be a little side-eyed and look at people, you know. But my belief is very African-centered, you know, I could say that. I believe that all of the world religions originate in Africa, despite all of the complex things. It's actually more about politics than religion, because the spread of Islam and the spread of the Catholic Church, particularly what is known as the Dark Ages and the medieval period leading up to what is called the so-called Renaissance period in Europe, you know, all of that was more political than anything. And these people were just using that for that, you know. So now I grow up, I don't ascribe to the denomination that I grew up in, you know, which is Anglican. But me, I do not ascribe to any of these sort of mainstream religions as well. Mine is very much African-centered, very much tied to my heritage and my culture as well. And I do not ascribe to Eurocentric versions of Christianity. I do not ascribe to most Judeo religions as people see it in its traditional forms today, because of some of the history, largely due to some of the history that we know. And I also know and understand and form my own beliefs and opinions based on the history that I know. You know?
Okay.
I see.
Yeah.
So when you say African-centered, that's what you mean? It's based on the history that you know?
Yes, in part. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, and continue your good work. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Newry.
you.
Pleasure. So far we call if you're researching your family, you should consider going to reaching out to people from Hopetown and the Winey Malone Museum,
Right.
because they do research on Bahamian family names.
Oh, yeah.
And they have a particular project called the Bahamian.
The Bahamas DNA Project is actually right there online. People will be surprised and shocked at what they will find. Of course, and it's not only the white side either. Now, there is a lot of it done with white families and those mixed with white families, but that's, of course, because of the situation at the time and the better record keeping that they would have.
Yeah.
The reality is most people of African descent, we are products of a history that our ancestors did not choose. Whereas most Europeans are products of a history that their ancestors did choose.
And of course, you could also go to familysearch.org and use the Mormon site to find records, birth certificates, death certificates.
Certainly, not a good one. WikiTree.
What's WikiTree?
WikiTree. So WikiTree is literally like a family tree website that they based on kind of Wikipedia. So they like to think of themselves as the Wikipedia of family trees. You will find many family trees and stories of people, particularly surrounding the loyalists and stuff like that. But you also find a lot about Bahamians who lived in post-slavery, particularly those that would have done something, particularly those attached to certain churches and things like that as well. So you could literally Google the name, put Bahamas, and then put WikiTree, WIKI tree, TREE, one word.
When I'm doing research, I find that Bradley Roberts, the later Bradley Roberts, has an extensive Bahamian family tree, like different last names. He just put detail. Right. So when I get stuck, right, I'm looking for John Brown. And I type in John Brown, and his website come up, and they have John Brown the various John Brown when they died, and you say, "Oh, this is the right one I'm looking for," with pictures and details.
Yeah,
so you could also go to ancestry.com.
Yes.
And because of the late Bradley Roberts research, you can perhaps more than because he's a collect old obituaries and record the dates of them. You can find maybe your family lying there. But let's go quickly to the caller. Go ahead, caller.
You can hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to know if Rasta is a religion, because they worship a dead man, Selassie, but Selassie was a Christian, and Marcus Garvey was a Christian.
But the Rastafarians said they're not a religion. They are a way of life.
Way of life, right.
Why do they worship Selassie?
Well, I know why some people worship Buddha.
And Selassie was a Christian, along with Marcus Garvey.
Remember, they say they don't worship. It's not a religion. It's a lifestyle.
So they don't worship Selassie.
They might, by trying to say it's a lifestyle. It's not a religion, it's a lifestyle.
But if they worship someone, that's a religion.
Yeah, but they say they're not a religion. They say it's a lifestyle.
Okay, because Selassie was a Christian, Marcus Garvey was a Christian.
Well, Jesus was not a Christian, he was a Jew.
Yes, but followers of Jesus are Christians.
Yeah, but Jesus was a Jew, like you said. Jesus was a Jew.
Yes, I know that.
The followers of Jesus should be Jewish.
Scripture say they were first called Christians in Antioch.
Yes, but not by Jesus though. But not by Jesus. Jesus was a Jewish person.
Yes, I know that. But followers of him were called Christian in the early days.
Yes, by strange white people. I agree. But go ahead.
All right, just a comment on that. So. When we look at history, and there's often this people look at this big controversy or this adversarial relationship between history, science, and religion. When you look at the foundations of Rastafarian faith, it is actually very much grounded in history, right? I don't understand when people say Selassie was just a man. So what was Jesus? Was Jesus a camel, or was Jesus an eagle? Or was Jesus a dragon? No, Jesus was what? A man, right?
They said the Son of Man do all kind of things.
Yeah, but he was a man. That's what he was. In his form on earth, he was a man.
And he always asking, who do people say?
Right, you understand?
And go with that.
Yeah, Selassie was a Christian and Marcus Garvey was a Christian, but Selassie is actually his bloodline that exists in Ethiopia that's backed by the documented Kebra Nagas. You understand? So it's not like, people often try to misconstrue, and it's just like some random person. So they're saying no cult. Like when some fella pop up and say he's Jesus or chosen by
You know,
Jesus.
they say Christianity was a cult at one time.
Right, exactly.
But I won't talk about it. I talk about family trees.
Anyway, yeah, sorry. But just to make that comment.
Ancestry.com is also an avenue that you can choose to research behemoth. First, you do all history, you get all the names and the dates of the births,
Right.
and then you start reaching out through these different mechanisms in terms of how to research. And then you can go to sites like What do you say?
Wikitree.
Wikitree. And you go to sites like Ancestry.com,
Right.
which is kind of American.
But with Ancestry, as I was just going to say, you would want to go to the .co.uk. So with the .com one, you will find a lot of behemoth documents with ones that's attached to like migrations and the project in Florida and stuff like that. But our records are more intertwined with ancestry.co.uk, which is ancestry.com, but the UK version, if you will. And then there's another site that's quite interesting, that's actually connected to things like reparations. And this is how you could even begin to trace some of the things and the money that was made off of slavery of your ancestors. And that site is a part of the University College of London's website called Legacies of British Slave Owners.
Let's go quickly to this caller here so we go back on the topic because we're running out of time. Go ahead, caller.
Listen, Christ was no ordinary man. He was declared the Son of God with power.
I agree.
Okay.
Let's continue. and let's like you. Christ was not an ordinary man. He has been declared God, and I agree with you.
Well, that's how Rastafarians feel about other characters too, you know.
Yes,
and you see there's so much nuance.
And Buddha got enlightened from
you have to educate yourself more, man. There's so much nuance because the Naya Bingi don't believe exactly what the Bobo Shanti believe. The Bobo Shanti have a Christ figure, and other denominations believe that Christ figure is still coming, you know, in different manifestations.
And different Christians view Jesus differently.
Thank you very much.
They say he was no God. He was a chosen one, an elected one,
just as I was
etc.,
etc.,
etc., all that.
Yeah.
But let's run out of time. So we list a couple of sites. There is the Wikitree, Ancestry.com.
Right.
What else? The people in Abaco.
Yeah, Winani Malone Museum, the Bahamas DNA Project. And then, of course, you could always come and see me at Clifton Heritage Park. You could email me at christopherdavis.clifton@gmail.com if you want any sort of consultancy or assistance in helping out with
And
your
you should
family.
copy all kind of birth certificates and death certificates and have it part of your narrative.
Right.
Collect obituaries
Certainly.
and write narratives on each of your ancestors, like a little short story.
And talk to Grammy, talk to Grumpa, talk to Annie, talk to the more seasoned and experienced people in your family about your family tree
And
as
take
well.
pictures of your ancestors and keep them as records and create a
Certainly.
booklet type thing.
Certainly. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, Christopher Davis. This has been Guardian Radio in the AM with C.A. Newry. I appreciate it. I got to invite you again so we can talk about this Islam and the Muslim and the Moors.
Yes,
and
yes, sir.
how they
Yes, sir.
enslave some of us too.
Oh, yes,
Everybody
sir.
want to be more now. Have a wonderful day.
Okay.